Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to talk about one of the habits that separates consistent elk killers from everybody else. Most hunters spend years chasing better gear, better calls, better tactics, believing the next tip is what finally puts them over the top. But after more than 3 decades hunting Western elk, I can tell you the biggest separator isn't knowledge, it's behavior. It's not about what you know, it's about what you do every single day in preparation for the mountain. Because the truth is, elk don't reward effort alone, they reward awareness, adjustment, and discipline. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter and outdoorsman. In this episode, I'm going to break down the one habit that changes everything, why it works, what it actually looks like in real elk country, and how you can start applying it immediately so you stop guessing and start hunting with more intent. Most elk hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because their effort isn't directed. They bounce from tactic to tactic, calling one day, spot and stalk the next, hiking deeper, changing units, switching strategies, constantly searching for something that works. And when it doesn't, they assume the problem is just knowledge. So they look for more tips, more content, more secrets. But the issue isn't information, it's inconsistency in how they apply it. In my experience, the majority of hunters operate off emotion instead of structure. They get excited when they hear a bugle and abandon their plan. They get discouraged after a slow morning and start second guessing everything. They let weather, pressure, or a lack of encounters dictate their mindset instead of adjusting their approach. There's no system, no daily process, no accountability to what actually happened versus what they expected to happen. And because of that, every day becomes random. Consistent elk killers don't hunt randomly. They don't rely on motivation or hope. They operate with control, awareness, and purpose. Until that shift happens, most elk hunters stay stuck, putting in effort, but never really building consistency. Consistent elk killers aren't separated by some secret tactic. They're separated by how they operate every single day. When you watch them closely, you start to notice a pattern. They move with more intention. They don't rush decisions. They don't get pulled in 10 different directions by every bugle, track, or piece of fresh sign. Everything they do ties back to a reason. They're not reacting to elk. They're working a plan. In my experience, those hunters stay calm when things don't go right. A blown stalk doesn't send them into panic mode. A quiet morning doesn't cause them to abandon an area too early. They take in information, process it, and make controlled adjustments instead of emotional ones. They also don't waste energy guessing. They're constantly narrowing things down, where elk are likely to be, how they're using terrain, how pressure is affecting movement. Every decision builds on the last one, and that's the difference. It's not just intensity, it's clarity. While a lot of hunters are chasing moments, consistent elk killers are building a pattern, a system, and that pattern gives them something a lot of hunters never develop: confidence grounded in understanding, not just hope. The one habit that separates consistent elk killers from everybody else is pretty simple to understand, but it's hard to commit to. It's daily evaluation and adjustment. At the end of every hunt, and often multiple times throughout the day, consistent elk hunters, the ones that I know that consistently kill elk, are asking themselves one question: what actually happened, and what does that mean? Not what they hoped would happen, not what they planned for, what the elk actually did on the hunt. They break the day down in real terms. Where were the elk? When did they move? How did the wind behave in the terrain? What pressure existed there? What worked and what didn't? Then, and this is the part a lot of hunters skip, They adjust. They don't carry yesterday's assumption into today. They don't just stay locked into a plan just because it felt right. They refine their approach based on real information gathered in the field. Over time, it compounds. Instead of guessing, they start recognizing patterns. Instead of reacting late, they begin anticipating movement. And instead of hoping to run into elk, they start putting themselves in position consistently. It's not flashy, it's not exciting, but it's the habit that turns experience into results. Daily evaluation isn't something you do once back at the truck. It's something that happens all day if you're paying attention. It starts in the morning. As you move into your setup, you're already comparing expectation versus reality. Did the wind do what it was supposed to? Did elk use the area the way you thought they would? If not, that's your first adjustment point. Not something you ignore until later. Midday is when a lot of hunters shut off mentally, right? Consistent elk killers don't. They use that time to either study terrain, confirm bedding assumptions, and read subtle movement. Even when elk aren't visible, they're gathering information, thermals, pressure, access routes, escape paths. Then in the evening, everything gets tied together. They ask, where were the elk today? Why were they there? What kept me from getting into position? What changes tomorrow? And they answer those questions honestly, not based on ego, not based on what they wanted to be true, but based on what the mountain actually showed them. And that process repeats every single day. And over time, it sharpens everything, your movement, your positioning, your timing, until fewer and fewer decisions are left to chance. If daily evaluation is so simple, why don't more elk hunters do it? Because it requires discipline. Most people aren't willing to maintain when they're tired, frustrated, or unsure. And really, it's not sexy. It's not something dudes think that they need to do. After a long day in the mountains, miles on your legs, elevation gain, maybe no elk encounters, the last thing most dudes, hunters, want to do is sit down and analyze what happened. It's easier to blame the wind, the pressure, or bad luck, and hope tomorrow is different. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations and Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory, it's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. There's also ego involved. A lot of elk hunters don't want to admit they misread a situation. They don't want to question their plan. So instead of adjusting, they double down on what they thought should have worked. And then there's the lack of structure. Most elk hunters were never taught how to evaluate a hunt. They don't have a system. So even if they try, it turns into vague thoughts instead of clear conclusions. So they just skip it. And when they skip evaluation, they skip improvement. Days start to blur together. The same mistakes repeat themselves. Opportunities are missed for the same reasons. It's not a lack of effort that holds most hunters back. It's the unwillingness to slow down, be honest, and make real adjustments. Once you commit to daily evaluation and adjustment, your entire season is going to start to feel different. You're no longer walking into each day hoping things line up. You're building off of what you've already learned. Every encounter, Every mistake, every blown opportunity starts feeding into better decisions. Instead of guessing where elk might be, you start narrowing it down based on real patterns. You recognize how they're using terrain, how they're reacting to pressure, and how wind is shaping their movement. And that clarity right there changes how you hunt. You're going to move less, but with more purpose. You pass on low percentage setups because you understand why they won't work, and you position yourself earlier. You anticipate instead of react. Momentum starts to build at this point. One good decision leads to another. You get closer more often. Opportunities become more frequent. Not because elk suddenly appear, but because you're finally aligned with how they're actually behaving. And that's when your confidence shifts. It's no longer based on hope or motivation, it's based on proof. You did it. And once you reach that point, consistency isn't something you chase anymore, it's something you've built through disciplined daily execution. This habit shows up the clearest when things stop going according to plan. Take a pressure unit where elk suddenly go silent. Most elk hunters assume the elk left or shut down completely. They cover more ground, maybe they call louder or abandon the area. But a hunter who evaluates the situation recognizes what actually changed. Pressure increased, movement tightened, and elk shifted into more secure terrain. Instead of leaving, they adjust their positioning and timing and they stay in the game. Or think about wind that doesn't behave the way it should. You plan for thermals, but they swirl, drop, and shift unpredictably. A lot of hunters force setups anyway, and they get busted. But if you're evaluating throughout the day, you start identifying patterns in how that wind is moving through specific terrain, and you adjust where and how you approach. Even something as simple as a blown stalk becomes valuable. Instead of writing it off, you break it down. Where did it go wrong? Wind, angle, timing? That answer changes your next move. Those moments separate hunters. One reacts and repeats mistakes. The other evaluates, adjusts, and turns those same situations into opportunities. Building this habit doesn't require anything complicated either. It requires consistency and a simple structure you actually follow. At the end of every day, take 5 to 10 minutes and walk through the hunt in your head. Where were the elk? When did they move? How did the wind behave in the terrain you hunted? What did you expect to happen and where were you wrong? And those are just some of the examples. Write it down if you need to. The goal isn't perfection, it's just more clarity. Then turn that into a plan for the next day. Based on what you just learned, where should you be? What should you avoid? What needs to change in your timing or your approach or your positioning? And that becomes your starting point the next morning. Over time, this turns into a loop. Observe, evaluate, adjust, and execute. And the key is to keep it simple enough that you actually do it every single day. You don't need a notebook full of theories. You need a repeatable process that keeps you honest and moving forward. Because once this becomes automatic, you're no longer just hunting elk, you're learning them in real time. And that's where consistency is built. At the end of the day, the difference between hunters who occasionally find elk and those who consistently get into them isn't talent, gear, or even just experience alone. It's how those hunters operate. Most hunters spend entire seasons hoping something changes. Better weather, less pressure, more bugling. But consistent elk killers don't wait for better conditions. They create better outcomes by paying more attention, evaluating honestly, and then adjusting daily. That's the separator. It's not flashy. It's not going to get attention on social media, but it's what actually builds real understanding over time in the oak woods. If you commit to this one habit, you stop repeating the same mistakes. You're going to start stacking knowledge that actually applies to your hunt. And little by little, things are going to begin to click. Because elk hunting isn't random. It only feels that way when you're not learning from it. Once you do, everything starts to slow down, and that's when real consistency begins. Now, if you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It is a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. If you want hands-on application and real-time breakdowns, we have an in-person Elk Camp 2026 that is built around the same philosophy: structure, preparation, and execution in real time. 90% of Elk Camp is going to be us running scenarios with you hands-on. You can check out Elk Camp 2026 at backboneunlimited.com. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community of Classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.